Today's show is brought to you by Woodward, PA. If you're looking for last-minute summer plans for your kiddos, over 200,000 children have had the summer of a lifetime at Woodward, PA. It's an overnight summer camp for ages 7 to 17 through August 15th. Programs include all kinds of things: skateboarding, mountain biking, scooters, BMX freestyle and race, parkour, roller skating, creative arts. They've got something for everyone. And they're pretty close, located 3 hours from Pittsburgh, about 30 minutes from State College. If you act now, they're offering $300 off a full week of summer camp for any program. All you have to do is enter the code CITYCAST, all one word, at checkout and get your kiddo ready for an unforgettable summer. Go to woodwardpa.com.
Today's episode is supported by AIDS-Free Pittsburgh. There are more than 5,000 people living with HIV in southwestern Pennsylvania, and the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program provides support services to help them get the care they need. That includes assistance with things like healthcare, medications, housing, transportation, food, and treatment for substance use disorders. Visit aidsfreepittsburgh.org to learn more.
This is CityCast Pittsburgh. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about.
Executive producer Mallory Falk here, in for Megan, and I am with Stephen Caruso, the Capitol reporter for Spotlight PA. Stephen, what is the latest you have ever turned in an assignment?
Well, I've definitely just never handed in an assignment or two. That was more like high school, Stephen. I tried to, get better with age. But if we're talking like actually did the job, just sheepishly hands it over late, probably a week.
Well, you're doing better than the state of Pennsylvania. The reason I asked is, of course, because Pennsylvania just adopted a new state budget over the weekend. It was a week and a half late, which by our state standards, actually is not too bad because we are notorious for being late with this.
Yeah, it's this is the 5th straight late budget. And again, I think, as I said in one story, sometimes they're fashionably late. They just, the budgets stroll into our lives just like 10, 11 days late, like this year. Other times it's a 120-day impasse where nobody talks for at least 3 months, it seems like, which is unideal if you are a school district, county, or nonprofit that needs state money to make sure that services are delivered.
Yeah, so fashionably late this year, not going to create a crisis for anybody, hopefully. We're going to talk about what the budget does address, what it doesn't, the questions it leaves open. Let's start with what's actually in it. What for you are the highlights of this $50.8 billion budget that Governor Josh Shapiro signed last Sunday?
It's a pretty stand-pat budget. A lot of it is just sort of making sure that all the programs that have been funded in the past, we're talking stipends for student teachers, period products in schools. These are some of the smaller but more meaningful programs. Even the big things like adequacy for school districts that have been found to be underfunded historically, that all of this just keeps getting funded. I think adequacy is a big deal, in particular because that's been a priority for House Democrats. Also, this budget does not touch the state's $8 billion rainy day fund, which is a huge priority for Senate Republicans. It does that by getting a little creative with the accounting. For instance, there's delays on payments to the state's MCOs, the Medicaid managed care organizations that pay for folks' health care who are on public health care. This is something the state has done in the past. They're doing it again because according to Democrats, at least, it came from Senate Republicans specifically as their suggestion to help make the books work. Imagine if you just went to your landlord and said, I'm not going to pay you rent this month.
I promise it's for a good reason.
Yeah. And I mean, here's the thing. The state, and these are really big contracts, and the companies that provide these services are very big companies. I think it's a little easier, once you're at the order of magnitude that, hundreds of millions of dollars are. If for some reason it seems to get easier to get funny with the numbers rather than harder, but I digress. I'd say those are some of the biggest things I'd really highlight. Those are the two biggest wins. Democrats are very happy to have their adequacy dollars, and I think Senate Republicans are just very happy that they can say they did not touch the rainy day fund.
And adequacy dollars, that's putting more money into the state's poorest school districts.
Correct. Yeah. And it's actually interesting because what we've seen now in recent budgets is a lot of the new money that goes to schools is being routed through adequacy. And that formula does pick winners and losers. I mean, it puts more money to the districts that have historically been losers. And that, is a policy decision that comes from a state Supreme Court ruling in 2023 that said that, historically, these districts were not getting their due.
Yeah, it was so bad, it was unconstitutional.
Correct. Yeah. So like there is this like real need that's being addressed by those dollars, but we've started seeing less and less money being put into boosts for the basic education that goes to every school district, into special education, into other things. Those have been getting smaller increases in an era of high inflation. I think we're starting to see that trickle down to districts that, maybe don't qualify for as many adequacy dollars. But with that said, I think just getting adequacy is a huge deal for Democrats because they've had now 3 straight years of these investments. The people who brought that lawsuit, the Education Law Center, they think they wish the pace would get a bit quicker. Obviously, every year that goes by for a kid in a district where they're not getting a good education is a year lost. But at the same time, what this all kind of comes back to is this budget still runs a structural deficit. The state is still spending more money than it brings in. I feel like I say this every time I am on your guys' show, but like it just bears repeating over and over again. The state can't sustain putting more money into education unless it starts bringing in more money or cuts money from elsewhere.
And I know that's a criticism of the budget this year is that it really doesn't do anything to bring in more sources of revenue. We're going to get into that in a moment here. But, one other thing I noticed in this budget is a pension bump for retired teachers, timeout education, but also state workers, emergency response workers, some of whom hadn't gotten an increase in quite a long time. That's, one of the other details I've seen pulled out here.
Yeah, and that's a really big deal. That's something lawmakers have wanted to get into law for years. I mean, it's in particular though it's been advocated in particular by the state's largest teachers union, the PSEA. They have a lot of members. This all goes back to basically a state law that passed during the salad days of the dot-com bubble in like 2001. The state pension system was rolling in dough. So they basically said that, we're going to readjust the system. A lot of people who retired after 2001 had pensions that have been getting pretty significant returns, but people who retired before then have been stuck without a COLA since then.
A cost of living adjustment.
So this basically, it's actually interesting. It's funded using iGaming revenue. So if you gamble on your phone on like a slot machine, it's revenue that comes from that, the taxes on that. And normally this is money that would be handed out by lawmakers for pet projects. It's funny, Senator Kim Ward, the president of the Senate, Republican from Westmoreland County, even said, this is us trying to, self-sacrifice as well. Like we're giving up on some projects normally we'd assign. Effectively, we're talking about earmarks here. But that's going to go to give COLAs to thousands of teachers, thousands of state workers, and also to some municipal first responders, police and firefighters. The amount depends upon how long they've been retired, but most of this is all going to go to folks who retired before 2001. So, it's been long awaited, really a lot of very positive words from, I think, a lot of folks who saw this as a win. And I mean, it's something that Democrats and Republicans, I think, are all pretty happy to be able to put on their resume going into an election year.
So before we move on, is there anything else you want to shout out from the budget? Like any other wins that might not be on people's radars?
There's about $775 million for road projects. It'll be small road projects. We're talking like state roads that Senate Republicans helped kind of hammer out as part of the broader process of making all the, like, the state just has a lot of money in bank accounts that is sometimes poorly looked after. And so this is one of their prime examples of that, is they're trying to get a bunch of this money to go to small paving projects and small state roads, probably particularly in rural Pennsylvania. Actually, from a letter I saw, Allegheny County is going to get the lion's share of that money. By lion's share, I mean like 6% of it. So, but some like $58 million for paving and such. So, I think that these small bits of governing that focus on how do we make sure every dollar that is taken in by the state is then used is, good governance 101. And I think like we're seeing lawmakers do that more as their back is against a proverbial fiscal wall. And I'm sure there's other places they could do that. But again, you can't dollar and cents your way with couch cushion money out of a $5 billion budget deficit.
Two things can be true at once. You can't dollar and cents your way out of this. And also everyone in Allegheny County is going to appreciate some smoother roads.
I'm sure about that.
Okay, let's get into what this budget doesn't do. So you just established we do get money from iGaming, but it looks like we're not necessarily going to be getting money from skill games. This is a hot topic. We're talking about these machines that have been popping up in convenience stores, gas stations, different spots. The state Supreme Court recently ruled that they count as slot machines. And there was some thinking that lawmakers might come up with a system for regulating and taxing them. But lawmakers did not end up touching skill games at all in this budget.
Correct. That was despite that ruling coming down in, it was kind of somewhat of a surprise to me. But yeah, that this is the case that been working its way up for a bit, and it kind of serves as like the deus ex machina to the long skill game struggle that has befuddled legislators, mostly because the skill games and the folks who make them, the folks who operate them, have poured millions of dollars into state politics. They've hired dozens of lobbyists. They put big checks in the campaign accounts. There has been a push to try and treat them at a much lighter level than gaming devices or like slot machines, saying that they're not. But the court, in this ruling that was fought between the attorney general and the device manufacturer, basically, or the distributors, I should say, it's now said that these are in fact slot machines. So that means that unless they're in a casino, it is illegal to have a skill game. It's not going to be enforced until about October. But I think there was this thought that, like, given how hard it was to come to a consensus because of divides within particularly the Senate Republican caucus, because you have one senator who represents a district that makes the machines. You have others who represent big casinos who are not going to be supportive of these machines because they take away casinos' bottom lines. Like, amid these divides, if it's so hard to find compromise, I think there was this expectation that, well, now there's a court ruling saying they are in fact slot machines. They're incentive to get something done. There's a ticking clock. The legislature tends to need a clicking clock to get a lot of stuff done. But it's actually interesting. Senate Majority Leader Joe Pittman, after his caucus had weathered a bunch of primaries funded by the skill game industry, remember what I was saying about them throwing politics in, he kind of took a different tact in this radio interview late last month, where he basically said, like, the way we see it, they're now illegal. Like, we have to make sure they're in an age-restricted environment, but, otherwise, like, we don't really have to do anything. They're just going to become illegal, which is, a position that is now the law. And I think that that's sort of the thing that's influencing this now, is that, there is really, the state might want the revenue, but any conversation on gambling is complicated. There's obviously negative social impact if you suddenly put devices that, again, the state Supreme Court has said are akin to slot machines in every corner store, in every bar, in every social club. I think there are some people who have concerns about that. It's going to be tricky to build a regulatory regime for this. Yes, the legalization, or I should say the regulation and taxation of these machines could bring in, up to $2 billion by some estimates. And that's money that the state needs. But it remains tricky. There's the social cost of gambling. And, the other option is they just do nothing. And these machines that have been a thorn in a lot of people's sides, if you oppose them, just, police can start ripping them out of stores, and there's not a lot they can do about it. So I think, like, it's still an open issue. I expect that it could still get some attention and fall, but in some ways, I think we're starting to see from some Senate Republicans, at least, is like, well, do we really have to do anything? And the fact is, like, they don't. It's just a matter of how much do they fear, the blowback that comes with these devices getting ripped out of the VFW, or how much they really want that money.
I mean, so do you? Does the fact that this didn't get addressed in the budget signal lawmakers are just going to kind of wait things out, allow them to get removed, not try to tackle this?
I mean, I wouldn't go that far. I think it signaled that at least it's complicated. Nobody wanted to get it done this year. What we've heard repeatedly is half the reason this budget got done as early as it did, because, like, it's not early, it's late, but early compared to November, is because they left a lot of big ticket items off that I'm sure we're going to keep, where we are starting to talk about. Skill games was not included. Marijuana was not included. Minimum wage was not included. Public transit was not included. No tax changes were included. They barely included data centers. All of that, because they didn't do that, they managed to get the budget done without a absurd long delay that hurts a lot of people.
In an election year.
And so I think skill games just neatly fits into that bucket. They could come back and address this at pretty much any time, and I think they could they could do it after the deadline. There is no reason that they couldn't let the police rip the devices out of a bunch of places and then legalize them and let it start over again. Like, the legislature always has that ability to act. It's just a matter of when do they choose to act. And at least at this point, they did not choose to act this month on this issue.
Well, let's get into some of these other issues that didn't really get touched or addressed. You mentioned there was not a lot to do with data centers. So what did and didn't we see happen? It seems like there's been more bipartisan support for regulating data centers. So it was a little surprising to me, at least, to see that that wasn't really a piece of the budget.
Yeah, and we'll have some more reporting on this soon, but that was an issue that up until the very end, I was hearing and my colleagues were hearing back and forth on, is this included or not? Will there be more on data centers? One of the biggest issues, for instance, is the state since 2021 has given a sales tax exemption to companies that build data centers for all the equipment that goes into it. Think about the farms, the cooling equipment, go down the list. This is going to cost the state about $2 billion by some projections from the Shapiro administration by 2031, which is not nothing when, the state's trying to find all the dollars it can. There has started to become bipartisan support for getting rid of that, on top of just other proposals from like Governor Josh Shapiro to keep that exemption and then tie a bunch of conditions for transparency, for labor, jobs created, for community benefits, for environmental standards, and then a lot, like, just all of these ideas have kind of been percolating as a way to try to address data centers due to wide grassroots backlash that knows no real partisan boundaries. And bills to do this had passed with pretty bipartisan support, but just not in the same version, the same chamber. So nothing that can get to Shapiro's desk. So like you, I think there was this expectation of maybe they're going to do something big, but in the end, all they agreed to was data centers will send into the Department of Environmental Protection their annual energy and water usage. Transparency is always good, but it was definitely surprising given all the energy around restricting data centers we saw throughout the month of June from lawmakers.
Something slightly less surprising was that, once again, this was not the year that Pennsylvania legalized recreational cannabis. Stephen, we normally do an annual episode with you and your colleague Ed Mahan over at Spotlight asking, is this the year? And we didn't even do that this year because we felt pretty confident it wasn't. So why was this not the year? And will there ever be a year?
One must always believe there will be a year. Every dog has its day. Every plant will have its moment to blossom forth. But I'll quit the purple prose. I think that this will probably happen at some point, but again, it's complicated. We have a Democratic House, we have a Republican Senate. I probably should have said that at the very start of this conversation. And we have a Democratic governor. Getting all three of them to agree on a single course of action is difficult. Even just getting the governor and House Democrats on the same page sometimes can be a little tricky. So that means that on something as big as legalizing marijuana, that there is some broad bipartisan support. I again would say it's like with skill games, marijuana is a drug. Studies do vary on what are then the social impacts of that. You have some folks who are going to bring that up more. What do you do with the tax revenue? How do you make sure it's an equitable market so it's not just open to only big companies, and how do you make sure small operators exist in it and it's not just multinational vertically integrated corporations? These are all the questions that lawmakers have to grapple with. And I should note that Harrisburg is a place where influence peddling is a very powerful industry. There's a lot of lobbyists. It's unlimited campaign donations. If you wish to make your influence known to legislators on a policy debate, there's many avenues to do so. I think that the call of revenue is always there, but then add in the ideological component, as there are just some people who straight up will not vote for legalized marijuana, mostly Republicans, but I think there's even some Democrats who won't. You're going to have trouble getting to a place where you can get all the votes you need to get a bill to the governor's desk. And it kind of, I think, reflects generally why Harrisburg has struggled to cut deals on some of these big picture issues that we're going to keep running down probably for the next 20 minutes or so, or whatever it is.
Probably less than that. We've just got a few more to touch on. And one of those, you mentioned it, raising the minimum wage. Reminder that our current rate is the federal rate, $7.25 an hour. It's been that way since 2009. State Democrats, our governor, they've been pushing to raise it to $15 an hour, but that is not happening.
Yeah, that one I think Democrats have been asking for a while. It's actually interesting. On the floor in late June, Joe Pittman gave a speech, the majority leader for Senate Republicans, and he said, and he's kind of made this point over the years, there's a number we're willing to reach. It's not 15, but if we meet in the middle, I'm willing to advance a minimum wage bill. And that has not happened. And I think this is where there's this back and forth that kind of happens where usually Republicans will say, well, Democrats are more interested in making political points out of their policy positions by just saying we're not willing to vote for things. When we're willing to cut a deal, they just don't want to cut the deal. To which Democrats usually retort, well, Senate Republicans just can't get their members to vote for any deal, so they just blame us for grandstanding when they, in fact, don't have control of their caucus. That's usually what the back and forth looks like. And then over all of this, you have Governor Josh Shapiro, who some folks will say is not doing enough to try and really wrangle everybody into a single position, that Harrisburg kind of needs a governor who's really involved in the legislative process to make it work, and that the governor that's just not something he's done. Most of the time when he talks about legislation, he kind of just gives a few requirements and stuff he wants to see and then says, I defer to the legislature. They need to pass what they can agree to. So you add that all up, and I think minimum wage is a great example of why we haven't seen anything done. It's just another issue on that long list. What's next? Are we going to talk about transit?
We are going to talk about transit. There were not the same alarm bells ringing this year about the need for transit funding, I think because PRT and SEPTA, the transit agencies here in Pittsburgh and over in Philly, last year they kind of figured out how to keep going for a little bit, but there is still no long-term solution for transit funding in the state.
Yeah, and I think this is one too that one of the problems here is that agencies were dealing with their own fiscal cliff, where COVID dollars, stimulus dollars were drying up. So there was this idea of they need more recurring revenue to get them through. That proved too tough because again, the state has this structural imbalance. So any money that diverted to transit agencies is money that's not there to pay for education, pay for low income healthcare, pay for paper clips for bureaucrats to make sure that the permit applications get sent in the right order. And that's all things the state needs as well. So what we saw last year is during that 120-day impasse, which transit really helped drive, Governor Josh Shapiro basically told the transit agencies to use capital dollars or allow them to flex them under state law. And the difference being is that operating is making sure you're paying your salaries and paying for gas. The capital is how do you make sure your bus shelters are rebuilt, or you buy new buses, or if your SEPTA, you could build a new transit stop if you need to on the subway. And those are different pots of money. Fiscal analysts say that's important because they do different things. And capital dollars do have to sometimes build up to be able to pay for things. Think about saving for a house. You get there by saving money over and over and over every year. But what the plan was just to use those dollars and shift them over to pay for the everyday expenses. Going into your savings account, because you're saving for that big ticket item to make sure you can pay for your food for the week. Republicans said that it made sense at the time because the bank account just had too much money. I talked to some old PennDOT secretaries over the years who said that yes and no. The no being that, again, sometimes you need to be able to show the federal government, for instance, to pay for a big project that you have XYZ amount in the bank to be able to afford that. Mm-hmm. This is all to say they didn't get it done this year. I think that this is an issue that remains a big priority for everyone. I think a big part of it, too, is doing transportation. You kind of have to do roads and transit at the same time. And that's a big, heavy lift that requires people to take votes they're probably uncomfortable with, maybe raise gas taxes, maybe raise another tax, maybe levy a fee here. And those are the sort of conversations that Harrisburg has really struggled to conduct and complete in the last 4 years.
Was there anything else that you were hoping to see addressed in the budget, that you expected to see addressed in the budget, that lawmakers just didn't touch?
I mean, I was really hoping they would give the press subpoena power. I figure that would make for a more open and honest conversation in Harrisburg. No, I mean, I would say that in many ways, there was a lot of conversations that I think the conversations around data centers, I think the conversations around taxes and the state's finances have seemed a little more honest this year. I think in general, though, it's almost what's to be expected. It's an election year. Folks want to get this done. It is a budget that hold steady on many of the things that lawmakers have invested in past budgets without making any huge changes. And I think all eyes are now going to be on November because, Governor Shapiro is up for re-election. It's looking like it'll be a good year for Democrats. Is that wave good enough to flip the state Senate from Republican control for the first time in 30 years? Maybe. That is something that has been the white whale for Democrats. If it happens, you will probably be hearing from Harrisburg a lot on a lot of really big picture items. Or if you don't, it's going to be a sign that I'm going to probably be here explaining why Harrisburg seems even more dysfunctional. But that's a separate story.
And so, just to underscore it, the thinking is the reason we were not months late, just like a little over a week late this time around, is because it's an election year. There was this desire to just wrap this up early. If not on time, yeah. I say early, it's still late, but early by Pennsylvania standards.
Yeah, early. And it's kind of funny. Like I had a conversation with the head of the County Commissioner Association, or the executive director, where he made this point of like, Harrisburg is a culture where it's acceptable to have late budgets. And I worry sometimes the way I even talk about it is like part of the problem there. Like, because you're right. Like it wasn't early. It was 11 days late. Like there is no reason you can't pass a budget ahead of schedule. I have covered one or two of those before in my time. And I think it does speak to the fact that and as these budgets continue to be late, it becomes harder and harder for the agencies who require state funding to get ahead. They the money doesn't just turn on like a spigot when they pass it. Like it does take a couple of weeks. So you add it all up, the cost of delay is real. So I'm not trying to be glib, but at the same time, I just sometimes don't know how else I'm supposed to process it.
Okay, so we started this conversation talking about how we are spending more than we are bringing in. That is a problem. I mean, whatever the election results are this fall, do you see a future where lawmakers can do what's necessary to start bringing more money into the state?
I mean, the legislature is always capable of doing whatever they want. They have vast power within the American system of government, not to sound like a political scientist here. And also, here's the other thing, is the other thing we've seen is that I think a lot of lawmakers are interested in the idea of effectively Reaganomics, supply side economics, that there have been some tax cuts under Josh Shapiro. Well, the biggest one has been a reduction of corporate income tax that was started by Governor Tom Wolf. I think the governor has tried to put a lot of emphasis on economic development, permitting. I think the hope is that, you can add up a bunch of policies that are pro-growth, pro-business, reduce regulation. That means more businesses will come here, more people will move here to work those jobs. The Pennsylvania's population will stop aging and instead start growing with more young people who work and pay. That's the other way to look at this, is that's the other way to raise revenue that isn't just the hard question of raise taxes or cut jobs. The governor has some stats he likes to point to try and argue that is the case. I have talked to Chris Bream, an economist at the University of Pittsburgh, who
friend of the pod.
Chris is a lovely conversationalist. I think when we talked, a big part of it is that a lot of what Shapiro is doing and what the legislature has approved is helpful for the state economy. Likely, it's all stuff that I think a lot of folks would say is smart policy, but isn't enough to completely close a $3, $4, maybe $5 billion budget deficit with new tax revenue. Man, that's a big claim. That's a big, hefty claim. So to go back to your point, the legislature always has the ability to do these things, to make policy changes. It's really a matter of what is there the political will for, because politics does dictate policy in Harrisburg. It also probably does that at every level of government, but in Harrisburg, at least, I think it seems quite obvious.
Well, Stephen, I always look forward to our conversations, even if they are rehashing the things we did not manage to achieve year after year after year.
Why don't you just bring me on to talk about baseball? I think we could all have more fun with that.
But are you a Pirates fan? Can we actually have you on the show? Or will you alienate all of our listeners?
I'm a fan of the Yankees, who take a lot of former Pirates. And I think I just alienated half your fan base. Sorry about that.
Well, if you're not too alienated, we will drop a link to Stephen's reporting on the budget in our show notes for you to check out. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. If you like what we're doing and want to support the show, you can become a CityCast Pittsburgh neighbor by joining us at membership.citycast.fm. We will be back tomorrow with more from around the city. Talk to you then. It really has been a minute since we've seen an increase.
Yeah. It's 725. I think all the neighbors are higher than that. And that's the funny thing. We've even seen some business leaders sometimes say, like, we could deal with a higher minimum wage, but getting all the lawmakers on the same page is tougher,